Hey everyone. So in this podcast, I'm talking to the CEO of Honeycomb. No, they're not the beautiful honeycomb wrapped in chocolate, violet crumble type honeycomb, which I love. They're a leader in observability. For anyone that doesn't know what observability is, don't worry, we're not getting technical in this podcast, but observability is essentially it's the software that's monitoring the software that runs all of our applications and all our systems, our banking apps, our TV apps, Netflix, Disney, all of these systems, and it's identifying any issues that are occurring in any of that software and helping engineers basically fix it so it can work perfectly. And for those people that know, I've worked in observability, or APM as it was at the time, application performance monitoring, for a long time, nearly a decade. And I worked for the leader, one of the leaders, I'm going to say, Dynatrace. And for me to do a podcast with Christine, it was a little bit challenging because I developed naturally over a long period of time a great deal of loyalty to Dynatrace, and I found it a little bit difficult at first to work out if I was going to be successfully objective enough to have a fruitful conversation. I don't think it's got anything to do with me. I think Christine Yen is one of those people that you get in a conversation with her and you can't help but feel really connected.
Yeah, I think one of the great humbling experiences of building Honeycomb has been building the tech. The tech is easy. It's the talking about it to other humans that's hard.
She's not your average CEO.
We were two engineers with no product background, and certainly no go-to-market background. But because we had both lived this and lived the solution, or a version of the solution, we had a very clear idea of the experience that we wanted people to have when interacting with what is now Honeycomb.
This company is also responsible for defining the space called observability.
New word to set us apart and to be able to reset expectations relative to monitoring and logging, which already have strong connotations, especially for customers. No one should ever start their company saying, I will define a new buzzword or a new category, and that will be key to my success.
But you did?
But we did, and we kind of knew it was the only path forward for us because there was so much gravity pulling us towards one of these other three phrases.
Yep. And they find themselves now in the magic quadrant, in the leadership quadrant. And they're a company that, if you look around on social media and you look at some of the discussion forums, you'll recognize that no one dislikes them. They have a significant street cred. I know why, and you're about to find out. Christine, welcome to the Tech Seeking Human podcast. How are you?
I'm excellent. How are you?
I am really well. I'm really excited to finally get the opportunity to talk to you. We've been flirting with the idea of talking to each other for a long time now, and so many things have been getting in our way, like life and work and just being busy. But I've finally got the chance to sit down with you and understand a little more about what's going on in the world of Honeycomb. Where on earth has this company come from, landed itself in the magic quadrant, and is looking to be like a red hot observability platform? Where do we start?
Wherever you want to start. Like you said, I'm just glad we got through our scheduling shenanigans.
We need an AI.
Get to talk. Oh, I know.
Can you develop an AI for calendars? That would be super good.
I'm sure there's already 5 seed stage startups out there already doing that.
Oh, well, we can't come soon enough. Let's start with, I'm going to start with a name. The Honeycomb.
Actually, little known fact, our very first name, and the name that we incorporated under was Hound. We liked it because we were like, okay, what we want to facilitate is someone sort of solving a mystery, going on a mystery hunt. And what does this in real life? Well, bloodhounds and hounds, and they're seeking answers to each incremental clue and following a path. And given the players in the market, you can imagine
Yeah.
we knew that this was going to be a temporary name, but
I nearly said that there's something about a dog in this industry. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know if you want to do that, Wave.
This was in 2016, so the current players are not who they are today.
Yep.
Back then, but even so, we sort of knew it was going to be a working name, and we actually got a cease and desist from a different company with a different hound-related product. And
it's a good start.
Yeah. Or whatever the precursor to a cease and desist is. But upshot is, a few months in, we got to sit down and, having spent 4 or 5 months building the product, talking about what we were trying to build, we were like, what's really important to us? First, that we retain that very kind of human friendliness of having a normal English word. Normal English now, no silly misspellings, or we're all coming out of the .ly era of startup naming. We really liked the idea, or it was really important to us that it captured this sense of structure, right? We were looking at the logging space, and we were like, well, it's 2016. You have to structure your data. You have to, if you're dealing with any type of data at scale, it's got to be structured in order to be able to analyze it in a meaningful way. So we've got to have structure. And we started playing with things in nature and playing with things that were very human, yet had an innate structure to them. And when someone threw out the name Honeycomb, we were like, oh man, not only does it have structure and is human, there's this sense of little bits of honey all around, where after you do the work, you get the insight. There's this feeling of all of these worker bees doing work for you to get the honey. And this is not actually how beekeepers work, but in our heads, we were like, beekeepers just get to show up and get the honey. And we liked all of those connotations for the experience that we wanted someone to be able to have with the product. And I think we figured we would be doing enough explaining of what the product was throughout the lifetime of the product that we didn't feel quite like the name needed to explain itself. It's probably mixed jury on that, but it's worked very well for us so far.
It's a great name. Is it, when you say we, who's we in this scenario? Is this something you guys did internally? Did you use an agency to brainstorm? Like, it's a pretty creative name.
Oh, it was myself, my co-founder Charity, and 2 of our engineers in the tiny back patio of the apartment office we were leasing in downtown in Soma in San Francisco. So it was
amazing.
Beers after work, and we just drew up a giant list. And
what are we going to call this thing that we're doing right now? What do you think? I don't know. Get me another beer and let's really think through this. And then bang, there it is. That's some of the best ideas come from, they say, the back of a napkin.
Yeah. And ultimately we were stunned that the domain name was available.
Yep.
And we were like, let's do it. Let's go.
What year is this?
2016.
Is this when you're starting? Like, you've just started, because I want to now go into like, where did the idea come from that you're like, we've got a challenge in APM market, or whatever it was called back then? I sort of vaguely know. But where did you come from, the harebrained idea to go like, there's some big vendors out there and we've got a better idea, let's do it?
Oh, it was, if only it was that logical. So my co-founder and I met at a startup called Parse, which, if anyone remembers, back in 2012, when we met, there's a mobile backend as a service, and she was running the infra team. She was the first infra hire, eventually ran the infra team. I was a product engineer, ended up building their analytics product. And the whole promise of our product was, you can use our SDKs and our APIs, and we will abstract all of the messiness of dealing with servers from you, Mr. or Ms. app developer. And great product. Lots of developers loved it. But the upshot of promising to abstract away all the complexity meant that we had to take on the complexity. We had to take on why this SDK version on that version of iOS hitting this endpoint with this shape of payload fell over. And I remember back at the time, this company was maybe 15, 20 people. Engineers would do a day on support. And because we had a huge free offering and, a fairly small number of small pro accounts, within a day, when someone would email in saying parse is broken, even just the back and forth of figuring out the parameters of the broken problem could take more than the day that you were assigned to answer the question. And so at the time, because they were all free users, like very often someone would write in and complain, you'd just be like, can't figure it out. Maybe I'll pass it to the next person, or maybe it'll just get swept under the rug. And to give you, Facebook ended up acquiring Parse in 2013. And to give you a sense of the scale of this like complexity mess that we were dealing with, at the time we were serving 60,000 unique mobile apps. And so these are apps where they could have anywhere between 1 or 1 million end users. Some apps were write heavy, some apps were read heavy, some apps were mobile games that synced their entire game state from every open client every second to our servers. It was chaos, and the tools that we would use to figure out what was happening or why something was not working the way that we expected just were not able to handle this explosion of complexity that we were dealing with. And to give you a sense of the tools that we were using at the time, we had, I think it was Ganglia on the monitoring side. We had some log aggregator tool I can't even remember at the time, neither of which is really optimized for, hey, someone is complaining about, I'll take a real example. About a couple months before the acquisition happened, Disney decided to start trialing an app on Parse. And we had a brand new salesperson who was talking to Disney. And I remember him going over to Charity, and I was, sitting maybe 20 feet away. And he was like, hey, Charity, Disney says Parse is down. Can you look into it? And Charity would look at her, right? And like, she'd try and she'd look at her dashboards of the overall system, and she'd be like, everything looks green. Have you made sure their Wi-Fi is on? Which is like a not unusual question to ask folks through the support channel, because mobile, sometimes the Wi-Fi wasn't on. And the salesperson was like, Charity, I can't go back and ask Disney if their Wi-Fi is on. Can you look into it? But because we had the dashboards for our overall health, and the only way that we could find out what was happening just for them was to have an engineer go in and write, if app ID is Disney, spit out a separate graph, spit out like a separate set of charts just for them. Right? Because monitoring, you're dealing with everything in aggregates. And our log aggregator was just like no help in helping us find patterns. And so, the Disney thing, we ended up finding like half a day, found an issue. I don't remember what it was, but that was state of the art in 2012. So
if Disney, then that,
yeah,
it's quite funny. And then your sales rep's really good, start selling to more people, and you're like, if like Walmart,
can you imagine?
If Delta, like you're going, uh-oh.
So when Facebook acquired us, one of the things that big companies always do is they're like, oh, tiny startup, you're so cute. Here are our big kid toys. And for the most part, the toys, frankly, were garbage because they were built for Facebook problems, which were not multi-tenant SaaS, polyglot storage, platform problems. But there was this one internal tool called Scuba that didn't look like anything we were familiar with. It wasn't like a monitoring tool at Facebook scale or a logging tool at Facebook scale. It was this thing that made a set of trade-offs around working with data that would let us capture, a sampled stream of all the data that was flowing through Parse and arbitrarily zoom into any of those 60,000 unique apps to be like, what's happening with this app today? Because again, the nature of the mobile market at that time, you would have some launch happen without you even realizing. And, one day it'd be Disney trialing you. One day it would be a Russian dating app that suddenly exploded. The other day it'd be something that, took off on Product Hunt. You just couldn't predict what would happen and how it would stress the overall system. And then the sort of important follow-up from being able to find what was happening for one app is, which other apps is this happening to? Who else is sending this combination of, put requests against this endpoint from that specific SDK version. And we became converts, right? The Disney challenge that used to take half a day could then become a 15-second operation to look up Disney requests per endpoint, broken down by SDK version, broken down by whatever other custom attributes we had added that mattered to our system. And again, to give you a sense of scale, in 2013, we were 60,000 unique mobile apps. By 2015, we were over 1 million unique mobile apps. And so this chaos just got worse. And yet the fact that we'd upgraded the tools that we used to make sense of it really helped us manage all of that growth. So that's 2012 through 2015. The sort of background music to this story is that Charity and I, neither of us were particularly happy at Facebook. We were startup people, not big company people. Yeah. And we would hear, each other say things like, I kind of, I don't want to be here anymore, but I don't want to have to build a system like Parse again without Scuba. I don't know how to build a platform that is this complex without something that can handle that complexity. And as we looked towards the trends in the future, we were like, well, everything's becoming a platform. Everything is embracing this level of complexity. 2016, 2015, right before containers were taking off. It was before Kubernetes. Yep. We were like, people are starting to talk about this container microservice thing. Isn't that just another version of this SDK explosion, this, operating system version explosion, this mobile problem that we're having? And we were not the type of founders to say, we want to start a company, let's go find a problem to solve. We were the type of founders who were like, we are arrogant engineers and we know best, and we have looked at all the tools on the market and they all suck.
Yep, there's your problem.
And we know, and we have seen this thing that should not only exist inside Facebook. We want to bring this to the rest of the world so that they too can build their parses while being able to make sense of their challenges. And so we both ended up leaving in 2015. Myself in the start of the year, her near the end of the year, and really got drawn back together around solving this problem and knowing that there's an opportunity to build a business around it.
Do you see, I'm so fascinated by this, where you start in a technical realm. Where do you start? Do you start coding something and going, I think it's sort of, or do you start defining? Is it in a PowerPoint presentation? Is it on a Word doc? Is it on a PowerPoint presentation, like a whiteboard? Like, where do you start defining what we're going to build?
We were two engineers with no product background, and certainly no go-to-market background. But because we had both lived this and lived the solution, or a version of the solution, we had a very clear idea of the experience that we wanted people to have when interacting with what is now Honeycomb. We knew we wanted it to be very fast. We wanted the experience to feel very interactive. We knew, and this is going down some data nerd holes, but we knew that we wanted the users to be able to update the schema on the fly. Previous, other logging solutions inside Facebook, you had to file a ticket to be able to add a new piece of metadata onto an existing stream of data. We're like, that's not a thing that will allow developers to be as productive as they should be. It's got to be flexible. And folks have to be able to get back and forth between an aggregate chart and the raw data that created that. And so we had a very clear idea of the user experience. At the time, Facebook had already published the white paper for Scuba. And so there was publicly available knowledge about the architecture, the columnar store that was necessary to provide this experience. And I am, to this day, still embarrassed that we were just like, great, we're going to go and focus on the technology, and we'll figure out the words later. Because 6 months in, 8 months in, I still remember 6 months in, we effectively started the company January 2016, although I had started doing some prototyping before that. In June, we tried to recruit our first designer. And again, designer before marketer gives you an idea of where our priorities were at the time. Little did we know.
Right. Probably right.
But we were chatting with this designer in a bar in San Francisco and trying to explain what problem we were trying to solve and how we were different. And I still remember the look on this poor person's face, just completely lost, because we were talking about data and high cardinality and real-time performance. And this designer was just like, I don't know any of these words or why they matter. And I could see Charity just go, okay, let's reset. You know, the last time you were on call, and then this designer just went to sleep, effectively in the seat. Like we
couldn't explain it.
We could only explain it to people who had lived the same problems that we had lived. And for those people in those first couple months, they were like, oh yeah, I do know how high level monitoring charts aren't enough and how logging is too granular. And like, I know, and you're telling me there's something in between that can help. But for anyone else who hadn't accumulated the exact same set of scars that we had, it was a struggle. And that thus began the beginning of the never ending journey to get better at talking about what Honeycomb was and why it needed to exist, and why the logging, monitoring, and APM tools of 2016 weren't enough. And I think one of the great humbling experiences of building Honeycomb has been building the tech. The tech is easy. It's the talking about it to other humans that's hard.
Oh.
Preaching to the choir here, I imagine.
Yeah. Gosh. Talk underwater, I find it the other way around. That's a fascinating thing to say, that the tech is easy, but the talking is hard. But maybe we come from two different worlds, right? Where I come from the talk world, understanding a bit of tech, and you come from the tech world. And I'm assuming you've now got to the point where you are able to talk because the company's doing really well. But go back for a sec. I just want to stay in this world of because I'm fascinated by how you got started. It sounds excellent. When you go out to pitch now, you're a company that has got some great tech, and you're really part of this niche that if you land with the right people, they get it. Were you landing with the right people, and were they getting it? And where did you get your initial success from?
Yeah, we, having been in tech and in San Francisco for many years up until this point, we sort of had our short list in our network of people who, either people that we knew had the same set of scars that we did, or types of companies that we really suspected had the same types of problems that Parse had. And in particular, we really looked for platform companies, API companies, that would have this challenge of shared resources, a heterogeneous customer base, and unpredictability of how those users would use your platform. But speaking to customers has always been easier than speaking to an investor audience, because at least customers, prospects have lived this problem, and they understand it. And the investor conversations, those first, honestly, few years were a real, I'll say, a real learning experience. Investors, and there's lots of smart ones out there, and honestly, the breadth of their role, I couldn't do it if I tried, so more power to them. But because of the breadth of what they try to do, they always try to put you in a box, right? How are you like this? How are you like that? And Charity and I knew early on that if we tried to say, oh, we're a logging tool, but faster, or we're a monitoring tool, but more flexible, or we're an APM tool, but more customizable, we would be anchored to that box and never be allowed to leave. And second, we would be, like you say, compared to the Splunks and Datadogs and New Relics of the world, or Dynatraces of the world. And we were like, no, this is different than all of those other tools. There's a different relationship to data than these other tools. And so I remember Charity went off on a word vision quest in August of 2016. And she came back and she was like, you know what we need to start talking about? Observability. And I was like, what is this word? And she was like, well, it's, and she did the whole control theory definition, but she was like, the only people using this word right now are these niche teams at Netflix
Yeah.
And I think Twilio may have had a team. I don't remember that one, but we need to define this new word to set us apart and to be able to reset expectations relative to monitoring and logging, which already have strong connotations,
Yep.
especially for customers. And no one should ever start their company saying, "I will define a new buzzword or a new category, and that will be key to my success."
But you did.
But we did, and we kind of knew it was it was the only path forward for us because there was so much gravity pulling us towards one of these other three phrases.
Yep. It's funny. You're so funny. I'm going to delve into this a little bit more, but I'm laughing at you because I've sat writing an S1 document for Dynatrace with lawyers and financial people, and it was the bane of my existence. And I would like to think that I'm not the engineering type. I'm a little more technical than most, and I'm trying to explain the simplicity of full stack and end-to-end tracing and things like that. And they're going, "Is it like?" And you're like, "No." And it would take us like a day almost to write a sentence. And I go, "It's got to be a better way, guys. Can I just go write this, come back, and then you guys could try and make sense of it? That would be far easier." And then I laugh now at observability because we were sort of doing the same thing back then. We were like, it's not just APM, it's also infrastructure monitoring, it's also experience monitoring. There's got to be a new word, and AI ops was coming in, and we were like digital performance management. We were trying to figure it out, and then someone goes observability, and I go, where did that word come from? What is that? What we're doing now? We got to go and change everything to observability? Are you kidding me? And it's like, this was these emerging engineering teams and people like yourself that had a grasp of what the future was going to be. And so I'm like, and I also understand the pain of like a new word. Are you going to, but the people that got it.
Yeah.
So this is back to your, like, you sort of got it. So you knew your people. So I'm assuming you go and start selling to your people and it's successful.
Yeah. I think that this is the thing that I have learned, that we didn't understand when we started doing this, is what makes an engineer great at their job is looking at a situation, understanding what they have to work with, right? If you're a structural engineer, it's like understanding your materials and understanding the physical laws that you're operating under. If you're a software engineer, it's understanding the tools that you have and how they fit together and the trade-offs, right? Engineering is all about trade-offs. And you take those you take those observations, you turn them into rules, you put those into your head, and then you build on top of it. And that's what you do day in, day out. And that same quality that makes you good at your job, which is engineering, makes it really hard for someone to come in and tell you, hey, these rules that you have about the world or these tools or trade-offs are wrong. Mm-hmm. And over the course of now, Honeycomb's been around seven years, we still talk to folks who are like, well, the way that I understand my systems is I have metrics over here for aggregate data, and then I have logs over here for granular data. And when I need something in between, I go from my metrics to my logs and back, and I hold context in my head for how to jump between those. And that is just the way of the world. That is just how we've always done it and how we will always ever do it. And I think that subconsciously we knew the world needed a shock to tell the industry, hey, these changes are coming. Your containers and your Kubernetes, experiments are going to introduce a set of concepts into your world that are going to break all of these rules that you know. And so, we're going to use the power of a different word. Endless debates about monitoring versus observability that will open you up to how your approach to using data to understand your software might have to change. And I when I think back to those early years, Charity was spending like half of her waking time on stage or traveling to a stage to speak, and that was
educating.
Looking back, it was a grand content strategy and category creation. At the time, it was like, these are the tools that we have. This is how we know how to reach our people. So we're going to do it.
But the industry started to pivot. The multi-cloud, microservice, Kubernetes, it really took off very, very rapidly. I assume you predicted this and were part of this. Therefore, you've put the company in a good position to be successful. And where did you start to see? Did you start to see the success in and around that period?
I think the success of it took a couple years, I'll say. Actually, one anecdote I like to share, which is more about the idea of observability rather than Honeycomb's success, although the two have been pretty undeniably intertwined. Monitorama is probably my favorite conference in this industry. It's a small conference in Portland, or they do it in Portland every year, sometimes elsewhere. Usually, I think maximum like 600 people. In 2017, Charity gave a talk there. Monitorama, the tagline at the time was a conference for monitoring conference for practitioners, something like that. And Charity gave a talk in 2017 with the title "Monitoring: a Postmortem." Classic Charity. I'm going to piss a lot of people off. And it was all about how monitoring was the past, how it was based on
at a monitoring conference.
At a monitoring conference, yeah. That's what she does. She goes in and like makes a lot of people mad. But how observability was the future and how all of these things were coming, and responses were mixed, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
In 2018, there were 6, maybe 7, but we'll say 6 talks with the word observability in the title, and every one of them supplied their own definition. Some were very, very technical and dry. Some of them were, whatever. Like everyone had their own definition. And everyone felt the need to spend like at least 5 minutes saying, this is what observability is, and that this is not how it's not monitoring. In 2019, not only were there 7 talks with observability in the title, the conference itself, despite still being Monitorama, changed its tagline to a conference for monitoring and observability practitioners.
Oh, wow.
And no one felt the need to spend 5 minutes anymore defining the term.
That's interesting.
And obviously this is like one tiny lens on the overall market, but absolutely, like you said, is an indicator of how quickly sometimes new ideas can become understood and accepted, even if not fully understood. And I think that time frame pretty closely tracks how we as a business started to get much more comfortable in explaining our value, showing our customers what was possible, and really starting to show our investors that we were not some crazy kids who were, trying to spread some opaque philosophy, but instead had a real potential to build a business.
I think it's you're so spot on, because you can evolve a category and the category can extend, and the definition of what that category is can change over time. But the speed at which observability came in as this new category, and I was just happened to be looking at all of the sites who claim to be doing observability yesterday, and every single one now that was previously APM or infrastructure monitoring all say observability. So everyone now is just like, okay, it's unanimous, it's observability now. But it's actually a fascinating case study in how a category creation occurs.
Yeah.
And without actually analyst support, because they weren't they're not keeping up, really. Or maybe they saw it, but were too locked in their world to be able to go, well, we can't go and change the name of this thing. We've been doing this like this for a long time now. These new kids, they'll just have to grow up.
One of the most interesting observations that Corey Quinn made on Twitter last year when we first entered the Leaders Quadrant is, he's looking at the other companies in the space, and he was like, of this set, Honeycomb is the only one that is not carrying over a set of customers with an older set of expectations about what this product should do. And I think that is, for the companies that, for a long time just said, oh, observability is this logging product glued to an APM product, glued to a monitoring product. And we specialized in one of them for a long time and have now built or bought the other pieces. It is always going to be harder to change how your customers want to use your product, rather than being able to set that expectation from day one. And many of those companies are all doing great, and so clearly not actually a problem. But it was an observation that really stood out to me, that we continue to have the opportunity to shape what observability means going forward, without a legacy to have to carry forward.
Now I've got to ask you, what's the pitch then? You go in and there are traditional teams or new teams and they know these other vendors. How do you differentiate yourself you said at the start, you're not very good with the words, but this is 7 years, 8 years later. I'm assuming you're getting closer to your point of difference and what your secret sauce is.
I think we're getting better. I think that I really see observability as the natural successor market to logging and monitoring and APM, as we've said. And what this means is that when I go into a customer conversation or prospect conversation, I really try hard not to pitch. I try to understand their world. I try to understand, what they're using today and where it is currently frustrating them. If pressed against a wall and asked to be, describe what we do, we help software engineering teams understand why their code is not behaving the way that they expect. Right? Very, very subjective, very broad. But when I say that to a prospect or a customer, they know what that means. They know how their systems misbehave, and we can start to have a conversation about how what their current workflow looks like, where they still have questions, what they're not able to do with their tools, and often we still have customers today who tell us, early on in our conversations, what you say you can do sounds like magic. I don't, based on the rules that I have in my head of what these data tools can do, I don't believe you. Show me.
Yep.
And
perfect.
Ultimately, with all data tools, what any data tool is capable of comes down to the data store, the data architecture, what operations and correlations or aggregations can be done on that data and under what performance characteristics. And I usually don't get down to that level on the call, but it's showing them what is possible with something like Honeycomb relative to what they're used to, these architectures that were not meant for this scale or complexity of today. And helping them see that the rules that they've had in their heads for years don't have to be the rules that they hold going forward anymore. I didn't really answer your question, mostly because you framed it in a way that let me imagine talking to a customer.
You did, but it makes me think a lot of the other vendors are hiring traditional salespeople that don't listen and need to be taught how to pitch. You've got a different model in how you approach selling, which is really understanding the engineer and being quite technical in the approach to be able to challenge the way in which they are engineering, which means you need engineering or more knowledgeable salespeople. I'm going to hazard a guess you don't have traditional salespeople and your culture's a bit different.
I think that that's largely true. We do a lot of classic sales things. We use the frameworks and, big fans of the Challenger sale, as you can imagine, here at Honeycomb. But I think that our sales leaders have consistently looked for folks who can be curious, who are there to build long-term partnerships with our customers instead of having it be more transactional. And that is something that we both try to screen for and emphasize. I think that, I'll go ahead and say it. Engineers as a buyer or an audience are terrible to have to sell to. Engineers always think they know better than the salesperson. They don't want to listen. They think they can build the tool better themselves. I can say all these things because I was all of these things. And it takes a certain kind of salesperson to lean into that and be like, yeah, well, this is a challenge I want to live up to. And I think I'm really proud of the team that we've built in how they're able to put that into practice and, frankly, be able and willing to walk away from a deal if it doesn't feel like it's a good mutual fit.
Interesting. Are you? Do you? What's it like for hiring then? How are you? Is it a challenge? Because this is not. There are other tools that have a brand recognition that are a lot easier. If you're a traditional salesperson, you just go, I just go where there's
It's
gravy,
true.
man. Like I'm just gonna go and sell that. It's easy.
I think,
You're emerging, so it must attract a
yeah,
challenger personality.
certainly our hiring approach, you know, hiring for our go-to-market organizations tends to be different from what it's like to hire for our R&D organizations. But I will say across the board, I think we tend to attract people who love to challenge the status quo. They love that Honeycomb is a little bit different, and that we say, we want to burn down all of the legacy, the incumbents out there. They're all doing it wrong. And I think that means that we have been lucky enough to have a real quality pool of candidates who, because of who they are, because of their natures, are really excited to lean into that empathetic, curious challenger sale, and to replicate that sort of I'm going to challenge what you think about the world ethos that Honeycomb has done all along. I late last year I finally read there's a book called Play Bigger on category design and category creation, and
Interesting.
It was really fun to read in at the end of year 7 of Honeycomb's existence, year 6, I don't know the math, to read after we had done all these things intentionally or unintentionally, because one of the things that they're like, oh, you must one of the key parts of building a strong category defining company is having your internal company culture reflect the approach that you take to the market. And again, this was not a thing that we had done intentionally. We were not like, because we are challenging incumbents, we need to hire a bunch of people who are going to be willing to challenge everything. That's just who Charity and I are. That's the type of people we want to work with. The people who are going to, drive our poor people.
Thank goodness we did it. We did what they said we were supposed to do. That's a relief. What a relief.
It was kind of a relief and kind of like a surprise and kind of like, oh, how, my brain is always, what could we have done better if we had known that this was the blueprint all along instead of stumbling into it? But
wait a second, did they write this book on us?
No, that's not at all. But it's, it was great to see that, one of the warnings we have given, we hired a new people leader very end of last year, and some of the warnings that we always, especially people in these roles where everyone at the company has an opinion about people processes, everyone is going to want to challenge something in the status quo there, and the one of the caveats we give these candidates is, hey, just so you know, there's going to be a lot of engagement. It is because someone has a lot of feedback doesn't mean they think you're doing it wrong. This is just how we at Honeycomb show our love, our level of interest and engagement. And so again, there's pros and cons to bringing together a whole bunch of contrarians and people who want to challenge the status quo. But it's great for what we're trying to do in the industry, and leads to a very consistent, I think, point of view and way of being as a company that helps with recruiting and aligning around values and relationships with customers, and helps us be a very, I think, authentic company as a result.
How do you see yourself as a leader? Are you like, this is an engineering background. You're not the traditional business school. I'm going to start with the culture and business priorities and points of difference and the strategic 5s. And this is very different.
No, I am not that kind of leader. I, again, wish that sometimes I wish I was. Sometimes I wish I knew the rules so that I could selectively adhere to them and selectively break away from them.
You don't seem to be the person that likes the rules. I'm picking this up in the podcast that you don't want to follow the norm. You want to break some stuff and be different and build your own thing.
It is sometimes nice to know what the rules are, though, so that you can break them. Sometimes best practices are best practices for a reason. Which, again, having stumbled through many of them, not knowing them, they're useful. I think I was actually just describing this to we had a new hire onboarding this morning. You have to remember, right before Charity and I started this company, we were not executives. We were not high up people. We were just employees at a startup that loved what that startup was doing and the team that we were doing it with. The type of employee that I was the annoying kid in the back of the room being like, why is that the way it is? And, what does this function do? And how does that work? And why is that decision being made? Whether or not I was supposed to know. The type of employee that Charity was the person who was like, this is obviously the right way. Table, like, if the authorities don't believe in me, like, I'm going to flip a table and like make them believe. And it's just always very anti-system, anti-authority. And I think that the way that those two personalities mesh is, we know we don't have all the answers. We know we are never going to have all the answers. And we know that the best chance that we have to Honeycomb being successful is by bringing together as many smart, curious, contrarian people that we can, and pushing as much context as we can out to them to tap into all of that. You started this question by highlighting my engineering background, which what was left unsaid very kindly is that I knew nothing about go-to-market when we started this company. And I think a lot of what has helped Honeycomb and me get to where we are is an immense number of kind people who have been willing to share their expertise, yourself being included, and also my willingness to just ask endless numbers of dumb and annoying questions, just to be like, how does this work? And why did you make that decision? And what else did you consider, to try and, as quickly and efficiently as possible, model the brains of folks like yourself in order to pick the right path for us. A lot of learning through mistakes.
I love the status quo challenge thing. It's things that I try and teach my kids. It's something that I've natively have just done because I think I'm a pain. And sometimes things just shouldn't be the way they are. And it was fascinating me hearing you talk about it, that Charity, your business partner is or co-CEO, is the science and your art. You're like, what if it wasn't? Can you draw those parallels? Can you? I've sat in a class before.
I don't know if we could do the science parallel.
No, I've sat in a class once, and it was the history of human evolution. And there was the science kids on one side of the class and the art kids on the other. And the art kids were going, oh, that's really weird. And it was like, so the whole reason for you going out on a Friday night is so you can pass your genes on to the next generation, was the statement. And like all the art kids are going, that's fascinating. I've never really contemplated. And the science kids are like, that's impossible. That doesn't make any sense. Like, that is not how I am programmed to believe that is the case.
I think in that analogy, Charity is the art and I'm the science. I think one of the most fun and challenging and educational parts of my personal Honeycomb journey has been figuring out it's working with Charity and figuring out how we balance each other out. I have joked for a long time that honestly, the right answer is usually somewhere between the two of us, because we are just such different people, both engineers, of course, but her, as I'm sure she was born, she came out of the womb with carrying a pager. I, at one point, fancied myself like maybe I was going to be a designer. I'm not, nowhere near that. But in terms of basically any other personality test, assessment, business horoscope, we're just opposite ends of the spectrum. And a lot of figuring out how to close that gap and come together has been us together figuring out, okay, well, this is what you take for a given. This is what I take for a given. Why are they so far apart? Let's talk about that. And let's strip that, these assumptions back to the problem that we're actually trying to solve, and other ways that we could, approach it that makes sense to both of us.
It's awesome. It's really awesome. And the fact that you have enough empathy to understand as a leader who you are and who charity is, and you're not stubborn and going my way or the highway. You're going, actually, interesting. Your approach is like that. Huh. Not all leaders are like that.
I think it helps that we had a solid base of respect for each other before we started to start a company together. Again, we had been coworkers, not super close coworkers, but coworkers for 3 years. This level of understanding each other has come from 7 years of working on that relationship. It is something that is, all the business articles love to talk about alignment. It starts with the founders. It starts with the founders being able to talk to each other and, when having conflict, retreat to that common ground of, we both want the company to be as successful as possible. I think you said something earlier about her being my co-CEO. We're not co-CEOs. She was the CEO for the first 3 years of Honeycomb, and it came a point when it made sense for us to switch. And now she gets to focus on being CTO, which I think she's that like mad scientist, archetype of a Silicon Valley CTO. But that sort of shift doesn't happen without being willing and eventually able to work through the like weird, messy interpersonal bits, even when you enter with the best intentions. So, I could go on a long time, and I'll spare your audience here. But I could go on a long time about, what it is like to really invest in key working relationships and the value that you get out of that.
Everyone puts on the slide that the single most important success of the company isn't actually the tech, it's the culture. I'm starting to believe, when I hear stories like this, that this is true, because the reason why companies are successful or fail is based on the relationships that you have with your work colleagues and how productive and innovative together you can be.
Yeah. This, I don't know, may sound like a cliche depending on who's listening, but we, especially over the last couple of years during the boom times, had many candidates, especially within engineering, who had to do the math where they turned down more lucrative, in some cases significantly more lucrative, offers from elsewhere to come work at Honeycomb because they saw the environment and team that we were building, how we wanted to work together, how we wanted to tackle problems together. And for them, it was worth it to make that choice. And that is something that, in the early days, this wasn't true, but today, certainly, I think our board understands that culture has a real positive business impact. It's not just something that the people talk about that makes them feel good.
I know it. So I know it seems crazy, but I think people want to do meaningful work. I know that's like
Shocking.
It's really, really like it's a revolutionary thought. But one of your cultural traits is to act with autonomy and ownership. And I think people feel empowered when you give them the opportunity to make a difference in the work that they do, because they spend a lot of damn time working. And if they've got leaders that listen to them, they tend to produce better work. They're more passionate about what they do. Like, I think you could be onto something.
I hope so.
Okay, so actually, no, before I go, I wanted to go one question on the tech before we it's been an awesome conversation. I think I could go on for just about ever talking to you. I gotta ask this question. You know where I'm going with this question, don't you? We did have a brief discussion about it, but women in tech is something that's like on the hot lips of the top of the agenda of these big traditional companies that go, we need more female leaders, and it's like, well, maybe we just practice what we preach and we just give people equal opportunities and they'll emerge, and here we are. What's your take? That was a loosely open-ended question, wasn't it? I really didn't go into a lot of detail.
First, I'll say I used to hate answering questions like this earlier in our career because questions like this can take the focus away from what an individual leader has achieved and more on characteristics out of her control. But that wasn't the spirit of your question, so it's just a caveat for leaders.
But for anyone that doesn't know, it's a really good point that some companies aren't getting invested in because of females, or they're just not. It's like a male-dominated thing, and it passes down, and that's a stigmatism that has to end. It's got nothing to do with it. Is that where you're going with that, or have I just really put my foot in it?
No, but that's I appreciate you making that point. I think that a truism is that, like you said, people just want to do good work. Turns out that applies to females too.
Yeah.
Women just want to
Amazing.
do good work in a place where their work will take center stage, not be and not have to have their face rubbed into the fact all the time that they are different.
Yeah.
You know, I am lucky enough to work with a team that has a ton of incredible and accomplished women. And you know what? A thing that they really like is not having to talk about that experience during the interview process. Not feeling like the token, or having the token in the existing token sort of pulled into the process to talk to them. I think that
it's like it doesn't have to be a thing if it's not a thing. If you just go, it's just we're people, then you can act like people. You can act like adults.
That is true if you have already shown that you can walk the walk. If I walk into a team that is all men, no matter the size, they have a little bit of work to do to show that it's not going to be the worst possible combination of solo Christine in a team of all men. I would love to be in a world where we can assume that everyone is just an adult and we'll just treat each other fine. And I think that we are certainly closer to that future than we were 20 years ago. And I've still gone to plenty of industry events where the activity suggested after the bars close is going to a strip club because everyone loves certain body parts. And I've been in that crowd where I've looked at my watch and been like, oh, it's probably time to go to bed. I think that there are still a lot of, and I think that I'm now at a point in my career where I'm comfortable enough and stable enough in my technical credibility or my career achievements, but that's not true of a lot of women who are at various points in their careers. And I think that there is still, when I see, honestly, when I was a college student, I really tried to steer clear of like women-only societies and organizations because I just so strongly did not want to be identified by my gender. But as I have matured, I look at those organizations and I think that they are still doing great work because there's a real population of people who feel underrepresented in the industry as a whole who don't have an existing network of people who look like them, think like them, have backgrounds like them, and will be able to be more successful in their roles because they're able to talk to and relate to people like them. An example that isn't gender related.
Interesting.
One of our engineers is hard of hearing. And there's a brand new CNCF working group that is focused around deaf and hard of hearing experiences in software, I think. That's what the purpose of the working group is. And because this is new, there are all of these stories on LinkedIn, like this week, about the impact that meeting other hard of hearing engineers had on their trajectories, because they knew that they learned that they could ask for closed captioning in meetings. They learned that they could ask for certain things that would allow them to be more successful. And women in tech and hard of hearing in tech, very different sets of challenges. But I like that as an example of there's real value in finding your people before you can feel like all of tech is your people.
Yeah. I just love, as I'm listening to you talk, I love the idea of it being a community of like-minded people going through similar struggles or feeling a certain way and having an avenue to talk and to brainstorm and to relate. And that's how I sort of
maybe there will be a future when we don't need specialized communities because tech will be inclusive and welcoming enough to everyone from the very beginnings of everyone's careers. And I would love to be in that future. And we all have some work to do before we get there.
It was a tricky question for me to throw at you, particularly as a male, and I think you've answered it so well. I think and I'd love your story of like you originally were like, I don't want to be part of this, and then later on you're like, actually, I sort of see that in a lot of what you're doing. You're continuously learning and adapting to your environment as you're growing, which is
turns out younger Christine was kind of a jerk in some ways.
And a good sense of humor as well. Before we go to the rapid fire questions, because I've got some rapid fire questions at the end, it's 7 years. And there's something about 7 years. I think I read somewhere along the lines, like, I think you shed all of your cells within 7 years internally as a human. You become a new person. Maybe it evolves. It doesn't just happen on like day, 6
You don't just dissolve.
64 days. I've respawned. My kids would like to think you respawn. But maybe in tech, it's pretty similar too, that there's, with a 7-year time frame, the world changes. It happens quite rapidly, so you evolve as an adaptive technology species. You said the tech is easy. Is what you originally built still arriving at where you think you are today and where you want to go?
I think it is. And there's obviously, now the vision is farther out, and now the road is longer, and there's all sorts of other things that we want to do. But I am every day appreciative and amazed at what Honeycomb has turned into and what observability has turned into over these last 7 years. And I can't wait for the next 7.
Oh, amazing. Now, these rapid fire questions, the first one, I normally would do it the other way around, but I'm going to ask you about AI.
AI will continue to be overhyped for the immediate foreseeable future, but I hope it will evolve into a more nuanced understanding of how to allow humans to do what humans are great at and allow machines to do what machines are great at, which I don't think we have a great handle on today.
No, there's a lot of adapting to be done, despite the hype. What advice would you give to 18-year-old Christine?
Can I swear on your podcast?
Oh, absolutely.
Great.
I nearly swore, but I was going to swear really badly. And I was like, don't do that, dickhead.
Great. I just want to check. Stop shitting on the marketing majors, which I swear is not something I'm saying just because I'm talking to you. But in college, Christine was kind of a jerk, and there were business majors, and I was like, oh, I'm an engineering major. Oh, they just take soft classes. And like, no, 18-year-old Christine, these are skills you are going to have to learn or certainly appreciate however many years from now. Don't be a jerk. And who knows what they're thinking.
Apology accepted, Christine. Thanks for shitting on me all these years. I feel so much better now. What do you do in your own time?
Hang out with my dogs. I read a lot. I'm on track to exceed a book a week this year, which I've done in the last few years. And in the winter, I like to snowboard, and I play a lot of board games.
Don't tell me you have an engineering process for understanding how many books you've read, and you're collating the key themes into like some kind of Jira board.
I'll say I'm a heavy Goodreads user. There's no Jira board, but I do like to reflect. Yeah.
Interesting. That's good. I like it. How do you prioritize your time?
Poorly. This is one of those things that, they're like, here are 5 skills that all very productive people do. And learning to prioritize my own work is something that I am always getting better at.
Very good. Best advice anyone has ever given you?
Professor in college, John Maeda, once told me, the key to success is always having potential.
Interesting. Nice.
Yeah.
Potential is never fulfilled too. So it
And always expanding
and
what's
on.
possible.
Huh. I'm sensing a little bit about that and your company. What career advice would you give to kids today?
Besides, learn how to use AI as a tool.
Well, that's a good one.
That's a good one. And what a time to be a kid. Um,
I know, right? Like my kids floating around watching Netflix and swiping traditional TVs because they think they can interact and dive inside them, and Oculuses and connecting with the friends and pinging and flying around the world, and like,
it's crazy.
beats me riding on my bike with a poster pretending to be a knight. Like it's a little bit more advanced.
I think the career advice I'd give them, because I think at this point AI is almost like a life skill, is always spend a little bit of time figuring out what you don't know yet. You don't have to know it, but knowing where the blank spaces are in your brain can, I think, is really useful.
I love it. Be inquisitive, right?
Be inquisitive. Yeah, don't
Is that
kind of hold a misconception and then lose all curiosity about that.
I'm picking up that common thread again. This challenging this status quo is something that's like pretty well embedded. Is this something that you learnt? Where did you work out? This is my last question. I know we got to wrap, but like, where did you develop this characteristic? Did you inherit it? Have you always just been born and just done it that way?
I think it was developed. Growing up, my parents had very high expectations. My parents were immigrants, and so, classic, like they had very high expectations for me to achieve academically within the bounds that they were kind of familiar with. And the outside world, I felt, never had particularly high expectations for me. As in, no one would have walked past me in 5th grade and been like, she's that girl, she's going to be a CEO. And I think reconciling these differences of like Christine, high expectations on this very narrow path, and the entire world doesn't think that you can achieve very much, has implanted a giant chip on my shoulder to go find out for myself what paths I'm not exploring, and to be really drawn to this type of people, Charity and my husband actually, who are just like, I'm going to take your rules and like dump them in the garbage and chart my own path. And I tend to look at those people and just go, how did your brain do that? But then get curious about it and shape that. So, I am a child of my circumstances. And I can say it is not boring.
Unreal. Like, thank you so much for taking the time to take us on this journey. I've really felt like this was a nice story. Like that, there's this whole story where you've really opened up and shared some really interesting insights. And if I take away anything, it makes me more motivated to talk to my kids about just being inquisitive. Like
Good.
for all the lessons that you can learn, and just for all humans, just to be inquisitive. Don't just accept everything that comes at you is what it is, because it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, I might apologize in advance for the I don't know how many more why questions you're going to have to answer for your kids, but it probably will also not be boring.
No, it's not, and they just the sheer nature. And I do these podcasts because I'm genuinely inquisitive and interested in learning, and I come away from this podcast personally being able to go like, wow, there are things that I want to do. I want to read more. I want to, this category creation thing is still a problem. I want to read that book and let's see if I can tick the boxes as to like, what could I have learned? What could we have done better? But thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I really wish you all success as you move forward, and look forward to catching up with you again when we get to talk again about how successful you've been. And continue to become.
Here's that. All right. Thanks so much, Dave.
Christine.
Bye.